The explosion hit the east wing at 2:14 in the morning. Emily had been awake, sitting on the floor of her room with her knees pulled to her chest, trying to figure out how to escape a mountain. Then the wall shook. Then the lights went out. Then she heard gunfire. Sharp, fast, too close. She pressed herself against the wall and stopped breathing. The door to her room burst open and she screamed. But it was Kong. His jacket was gone. There was blood on his collar, and his face had the look of a man who had already made several very serious decisions in the last 4 minutes. "Stay behind me," he said. "Where is Hyunwoo?" Emily asked. Kong looked at her for half a second. "Handling it." Another explosion. Closer this time. The ceiling cracked and dust fell like snow. "Handling it how?" Emily whispered. Kong pulled her into the corridor and didn't answer. Because the sound coming from the floor below them, low, methodical, terrifying, was not the sound of a man handling a problem. It was the sound of a man ending one. Hello besties. Welcome to Afro-Korean Tales. Please like, share and subscribe. Comment what time you are watching and also turn on the notification button so you won't miss out on more intense stories like this. Emily Adeyemi had a plan for her life. It was not a complicated plan. Finish her contract at Shin Corp, save enough money to start her own event consultancy, find a man who did not make her feel like she was permanently inconveniencing him just by existing, and call her mother in Lagos every Sunday without having to lie about how she was doing. That was it. That was the whole plan. Simple. Reasonable. The kind of plan a 28-year-old woman with a good head on her shoulders makes when she has been surviving on discipline and delayed gratification for the better part of 3 years. What the plan did not include was Hyunwoo Shin. It never included him. Not once. Not even in the version of the plan she made before she met him. When she was still in London finishing her postgraduate degree and telling Amara over jollof rice and cheap wine that she was going to Seoul for a 1-year placement at one of Korea's biggest corporations, and she was going to be professional and focused and absolutely unbothered by whatever the city threw at her. Amara had laughed so hard she had nearly choked. "Emily," she had said, wiping her eyes. "You say this every time you start something new. Professional and focused. And then life happens, and you become the most chaotic version of yourself, and I have to talk you down from the ceiling." "That was 1 time," Emily had said. "It was 4 times. Amara. The internship in Paris. The fellowship in Nairobi. The project in Dubai. And now Seoul." Amara had held up 4 fingers. 4 times, Emily. 4. Emily had thrown a pillow at her and told her she was being dramatic. But sitting in the Shin Corp headquarters 2 years later, with a resignation letter burning a hole in her blazer pocket and her hands slightly unsteady on her keyboard, she was starting to think Amara had a point. The office was on the 42nd floor of a building that looked like it had been designed specifically to make ordinary people feel small. Glass and steel and silence. The kind of silence that had rules. Nobody laughed too loudly on this floor. Nobody walked too fast. Nobody made personal calls at their desk. The 42nd floor operated on a frequency set entirely by one man, and that man was currently behind the closed doors of the boardroom at the end of the hall, doing whatever it was Hyunwoo Shin did in rooms that nobody else was allowed to enter. Emily had worked for him for exactly 2 years and 4 months. She knew his coffee order by heart. Americano, no sugar, temperature between 62 and 65 degrees Celsius. And if it was even slightly off, he would not say anything. He would simply look at it, and then look at whoever brought it with an expression that made grown men apologize for things they had not done. She knew his schedule better than he did. She knew which calls he took standing up, and which ones he took sitting down with his back to the door. She knew that he did not eat breakfast, that he worked until midnight on Tuesdays and Thursdays, that he never attended the company's social events, but always sent a gift to whoever was celebrating, that he had a small scar on his left hand that he never explained, and that there were exactly 3 people in the world whose calls he picked up on the first ring. Kong Min-jun, a man named Chairman O whose full identity she had never been able to confirm, and one unknown number saved in his phone, simply as H. She knew all of this, and she still did not know him at all. That was the problem with Hyunwoo Shin. You could study him for years. You could catalog every habit, every preference, every micro-expression. And at the end of all of it you would still feel like you were standing outside a building with no doors, looking in through frosted glass. Emily had spent 2 years telling herself that was fine, that she was there to do a job, not to decode her boss, that the distance between them was professional and appropriate, and exactly what it should be. But then came the Tuesday morning 3 weeks ago when she had been standing at the printer collating reports for a board meeting, and she had looked up and caught Hyunwoo watching her from the doorway of his office. Not glancing. Not the quick supervisory look of a man checking that work was being done. Watching. Still. Focused. Like she was the only thing in the room worth looking at. She had stared back. He had not looked away. And something had moved in her chest that she had absolutely no business feeling for her employer. And she had looked back down at the printer, and pretended her hands were not shaking. That was when she had started writing the resignation letter. Because Emily Adeyemi was many things. Naive was not one of them. She knew what it meant when a man looked at you like that. She also knew what it meant when that man was Hyunwoo Shin, untouchable, unreachable, with a coldness around him that felt less like personality and more like armor. She had watched enough women in this building develop feelings for him, and quietly destroy their own peace. She was not going to be one of them. So she had written the letter. She had found a new job, a smaller firm, less prestigious, but genuinely hers. She had made a plan. And she had, for the first time in 2 years, agreed to go on a date. His name was David Kim. He was a regular architect. He had sent her 3 thoughtful messages before asking if she would like to have dinner, and he had chosen a restaurant she had mentioned in passing, which meant he had actually listened to her, which was already more than most men had done. The date was this Saturday, but first, she had to get through today. She straightened her blazer, checked the letter was still in her pocket, and stood up from her desk. Jisoo parked past her in the corridor, and for a moment she thought he would say something. He usually had something to say, Jisoo, always smiling, always angled toward whoever held the most power in the room. But he walked past her without a word. His face was strange, flat in a way she had not seen before. She slowed down and watched him disappear around the corner and felt a small, quiet alarm go off somewhere at the back of her mind. She kept walking. The boardroom doors were at the end of the hall. Heavy, dark wood and frosted glass panels. Emily stood in front of them for a moment with her hand raised, and then knocked twice. "Come in," said Hyunwoo's voice. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. He was standing at the far end of the table with his back to her, looking out at the city below. He was in a black suit as always. His posture was the kind that took either military training or a very particular type of self-discipline. Completely still, shoulders level, like the floor was a stage and he had been told exactly where to stand on it. The morning light was coming in through the glass and it caught the sharp line of his jaw, and Emily hated, absolutely hated, that her brain registered that at all. "Close the door," he said. She closed it. "Sir," she said. "I have something I need to speak with you about." "Sit down, Emily." She noted that he used her name. He rarely used her name. It was usually Miss Adeyemi, or nothing at all, just the particular way he tilted his head that somehow communicated an entire sentence. She did not sit down. "I'll stand, thank you," she said. "This won't take long." He turned around then, slowly, and he looked at her with those dark, unreadable eyes and said nothing, which was his way of telling her to continue. Emily pulled the letter from her pocket. She had practiced this 14 times in the mirror. She was not going to stumble. "I'm tendering my resignation," she said, and her voice was steady. She was proud of that, completely steady. "My last day will be in 4 weeks as per my contract. I've prepared a full handover document for whoever takes over my role. I wanted to tell you in person rather than send it through HR." She placed the letter on the table between them. The room was very quiet. Hyunwoo looked at the letter. Then he looked at her. He did not move toward it. He did not pick it up. He simply looked at it for a long moment like it was a mildly interesting object that someone had left on his table by mistake. Then he walked to the boardroom door and locked it. Emily blinked. "What are you doing?" "Sit down," he said again, and this time it was not a suggestion. "Hyunwoo." "Sit down, Emily." She sat, not because she was afraid of him, she told herself, but because something in his voice had shifted into a register she had never heard before in 2 years and 4 months of working beside this man. And her body had responded before her mind caught up. He came back to the table. He did not sit. He stood on the other side of it with both hands flat on the surface and looked at her directly and said, "Who is David Kim?" The floor dropped out from under her. "I'm sorry," she said. "David Kimu. He sent you a message on Wednesday at 7:18 in the evening. You replied at 7:45. He asked you to dinner. You said yes." Hyunwoo's voice was completely even. Conversational, almost. "Who is he?" Emily's heart was beating very fast. "How do you know that?" "Who is he?" "That is my private." "Emily." Just her name. Like a period at the end of a sentence. She stared at him. "He's someone I met," she said carefully. "He's an architect. That is none of your business." Hyunwoo looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. And he leaned forward slightly with his elbows on the table and said, in a very quiet voice, "You are not going on that date." "Excuse me. You are not going on that date," he repeated. "And you are not resigning." Emily felt something hot move through her chest. She was not a woman who lost her composure easily. Her mother had raised her to be measured, to think before she spoke, to never let anyone see the exact moment they got under her skin. But Hyunwoo Shin had spent 2 years finding every nerve she had in this moment. This particular moment was pressing all of them at once. "I am going on that date," she said, very clearly. "And I am resigning. Both of those things are happening. And you do not get to tell me otherwise." "I don't get to," he repeated slowly. "No. I suppose I don't." He paused. "And yet." "And yet what?" He stood up again. He walked around the table, and she fought every instinct to push her chair back and create distance because she was not going to let him see that he unsettled her. He stopped beside her chair and looked down at her and said, "How much do you know about me, Emily? After 2 years. How much do you actually know?" "I know your coffee order," she said. "And your schedule. And apparently you know things about my private messages that you absolutely should not know, which is a serious problem." "That is not what I asked." "I know you're my employer," she said. "And in 4 weeks you will be my former employer. And that is all I need to know." Something crossed his face. It was fast, almost invisible, but Emily had spent 2 years studying this man's micro-expressions and she caught it. It was not anger. It was something that looked, and this made no sense to her at all, almost like pain. He walked back to the head of the table. He picked up her resignation letter. He looked at it. And then, without any particular drama, he tore it in half. Emily stood up so fast her chair scraped back. "What is wrong with you? Sit down." "You just tore my..." "Emily." His voice cracked slightly on her name, and that tiny fracture in the composure of a man who never fractured, made her stop. He set the 2 halves of the letter back on the table and he looked at her and said, "There are things I need to tell you. Before you walk out of this building. You deserve to know them. And after I tell you, if you still want to leave, I will not stop you." She stared at him. "You locked the door." "Yes. That is literally stopping me. I locked the door because what I am about to tell you cannot leave this room until I am finished." He looked at her steadily. "Sit down, Emily. Please." It was my pleasure to do it. In 2 years and 4 months, she had never once heard Hyunwoo Shin say please to anyone. She sat down. He sat across from her again. He was quiet for a moment. Long enough that the city noise from 42 floors below felt loud by comparison. Then he said, "Shin Corp is real. Everything you have worked on here is real. The contracts, the board meetings, the quarterly reports, all real." "Okay," she said slowly. "But that is not all that I am." She waited. "I run something else," he said. "Alongside the company. Something that operates differently." "Differently how?" His jaw tightened fractionally. "You know the name Chairman O." She nodded. She had handled calls from that number before. "He is not a business partner," Hyunwoo said. "He is the head of the oldest organized syndicate in Seoul. And he stopped. "I am his successor. I have been running operations for him for 11 years. Shin Corp is the legitimate face of an empire that runs considerably deeper than any of its public filings suggest." The room was very, very quiet. Emily looked at him. She was aware that she should be standing up. She was aware that she should be alarmed, should be backing toward the door, should be doing several things that self-preservation recommended. Instead, she heard herself say very calmly, "How deep?" Something shifted in his eyes. Like he had not expected that question. Like he had expected screaming, or tears, or the kind of panic that most people would reasonably produce in this situation. Deep enough, he said, that the reason I know about David Kim's messages is that I have had a security detail on you for 18 months. The comm cracked. I'm sorry, Emily said. A what? 2 operatives. Rotating shifts. They do not interfere with your life. They watch. They report to Kong. If there is ever any threat. A security detail. She was on her feet again. You put a security detail on me. For 18 months. Without telling me. Without asking me. Yes. That is surveillance, Hyunwoo. That is. Do you understand what you just said to me? You have been watching me. Watching over you, he said, and the distinction in his voice was fierce and immediate. There is a difference. There is absolutely not. 3 months after you started working here, he said, cutting through her voice with a quietness that somehow carried more weight than volume. A man named Park Sung-jin made inquiries about you. He was connected to a faction that was running pressure campaigns against my operations. He was asking questions about my staff. About which of them I was closest to. He paused. I noticed how I reacted to that information. And I made a decision. Emily's mouth was open. She closed it. You noticed how you reacted, she repeated. Yes. And how did you react? He looked at her for a long time. Like someone had put a gun to my head, he said quietly. The boardroom was completely still. Emily sat back down. Not because she was calm, because her legs needed a moment. Hyunwoo, she said carefully. Are you telling me that you have been? That for 2 years you have? She stopped. Reorganized. What exactly are you telling me? I am telling you, he said, that you are the only thing in my life in 11 years that I have been afraid to lose. And I handled that the only way I know how to handle things. He glanced at the 2 halves of her resignation letter. Not well, clearly. Emily looked at him. This man. This cold, contained, impossible man who had stood in countless meetings and dissected billion-dollar decisions without blinking. Who had once sat through a 4-hour negotiation with 3 hostile parties. And come out of it looking like he had merely been on a pleasant afternoon walk. Who had never, in 2 years, told her anything about himself that she had not found out by observation alone. He was sitting across from her now with something naked and complicated in his face, and she did not know what to do with any of it. I need some air, she said. Emily. I'm not running, she said quickly. I need a minute. Inside this locked room that I apparently cannot leave. I just need to sit here for a minute. He nodded. He said nothing. He gave her the minute. She used it to stare at the city below, and try to arrange the last 2 years into a new shape that made sense with this information inside it. Every interaction. Every long look across the office. The coffee was always exactly right. The way he had once rearranged her entire schedule without explanation the week, she had been getting persistent contact from an ex-boyfriend in London. And she had thought it was a coincidence, but maybe. Did you rearrange my schedule in March of last year? She asked. He did not hesitate. Yes. Because of Marcus. Yes. Marcus, her ex, who had been calling and texting and showing up in her building's lobby, who had stopped suddenly, in the 2nd week of March without any explanation. Emily had assumed he had simply moved on. What did you do? She asked. Nothing that left a mark, Hyunwoo said. She turned and looked at him fully. That is not reassuring. It was not meant to be reassuring. It was meant to be honest. You are a very strange man, she said. Yes. And you run a criminal syndicate. Yes. And you tore my resignation letter. I will print you another one, he said. If that is what you want. When I am finished. When you are finished with what? He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and placed something on the table between them. It was a photograph. Printed, slightly worn at the edges. A man she did not recognize. Big, well-dressed, the kind of face that had seen a lot and done more. He was caught mid-stride in what looked like an airport. His name is Kwame Ose, Hyunwoo said. Emily felt the name move through her strangely. Ose. Like Amara. But she said nothing and waited. He has been trying to acquire my operations for 2 years. Not legally. He has made 3 attempts to pressure me through my business interests. All of them failed. Hyunwoo looked at the photograph. His most recent approach has been different. He has stopped coming for the business. He has started looking at the people around me. Emily looked at the photograph, then at Hyunwoo. And you think he's looking at me? I know he is. How? Because 3 days ago one of his people made contact with someone in your life. Emily's stomach turned over. Who? Hyunwoo was quiet for a moment in a way that told her he had been deciding how to say this next part. Amara, he said. The name landed like a stone in still water. No, Emily said immediately. Not Amara herself, Hyunwoo said quickly. Someone reached out to Amara. Someone presenting themselves as a family member, trying to get information about your routine. What family member? Hyunwoo looked at her steadily. Her uncle. Emily stared at him. Amara had talked about her uncle exactly twice in all the years Emily had known her. Both times with a flatness in her voice that said the subject was closed. Amara never explained and Emily had never pushed. Amara doesn't really have contact with her uncle, she said. She doesn't. But he has contact with Kwame-ose. Hyunwoo put his hand flat on the photograph. Kwame-ose is Amara's uncle's employer. He has been for 6 years. The room shifted. Emily pressed her fingers to the table to steady herself. Does Amara know? No. I am certain of that. How certain? Completely. She exhaled. Okay. She looked at the photograph again. The man in it looked like someone who had decided on something and was merely waiting for the right moment to move. So what does this have to do with me not being allowed to resign and not being allowed to go on a date with David Kim? David Kim was introduced to your social circle by a woman named Cho Hyun, Hyunwoo said. Cho Hyun has been in contact with 2 of Ose's intermediaries in the last month. Emily closed her eyes. She opened them. The date was a setup, she said. Most likely. Most likely. I cannot be completely certain of my intent. But I am certain enough. Hyunwoo looked at her. I should have told you this differently. I should have told you sooner. I know that. But I need you to understand why I tore the letter, Emily. It was not controlled. It was not. I am not trying to own your choices. He paused and something moved through his face. I am trying to keep you alive. If there had been any remaining pieces of Emily's composure, that sentence took care of them. She stood up slowly. She walked to the window. Seoul stretched out below her, ordinary and enormous and completely indifferent to the fact that her entire understanding of the last 2 years had just been quietly demolished. She could see the coffee shop where she went every Wednesday morning. She could see the park where she ate lunch on Fridays when the weather was good. She wondered how many of those mornings and afternoons she had spent being watched by people she never saw. I need to call Amara, she said. Not yet. She turned around. She could be in danger. She is being watched. My people are on her. She is safe. He stood as well. But if you call her right now, before we have managed this properly, it could alert Ose's people that we know, which puts her in more danger, not less. Emily looked at him. You already have people on Amara. Since yesterday morning. Without telling either of us. Yes. She laughed. It was not a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh that comes out when something is so far beyond what you were prepared for. That laughter is the only available response. Hyunwoo, she said, you have to understand how completely insane this is. I understand. I came in here to quit my job. I know. I had a letter. You did. And now you're telling me my boss is a crime boss, my date was a trap, and my best friend's estranged uncle works for the man who's trying to use me to get to you. Yes, he said. That is an accurate summary. She looked at him for a long moment. He was watching her with that particular stillness of his, but it was different now. She could see the thing underneath it that she had never been able to see before. The way his hands were very slightly tense at his sides. The way he was breathing just a fraction too carefully. He was afraid. Not of Ose. Not of any of the external, dangerous, complicated things he had just laid in front of her. He was afraid of her. Of what she was going to say next. She found in the midst of everything that she did not know how to be angry about that. What happens now, she said. Something in his shoulders dropped almost imperceptibly. I need to move you, he said. Somewhere safe. While my team handles Ose's operation. Move me where? I have a property. Outside the city. In the mountains. He paused. I will explain everything there. Everything I have not told you. About what I do. About, he stopped. About the fact that you have been watching me for 2 years, she said. Yes. That too. And I don't have a choice in this. He was quiet for a moment. You have a choice, he said. But only one of the available choices keeps you safe. And he stopped again. Set his jaw. Tried once more. I am asking you, Emily. Not ordering. Asking. Please. She looked at him for a long time. Her resignation letter was in 2 pieces on the table. Her date for Saturday was apparently an operative working for a Ghanaian crime lord. And the man standing across from her, who had spent 2 years being the most closed and unreachable person she had ever encountered, had just used the word please for the 2nd time in one morning. Fine, she said. But I have conditions. His eyebrow moved. Conditions. Amara gets protection she can actually feel. Not invisible people she doesn't know about. Real, visible protection with a reason she can understand without knowing everything. She held up a finger. You tell me everything. Everything. No more finding out things later. No more surprises. 2nd finger. And you answer every question I ask. Even the ones you don't want to answer. He looked at her. Agreed, he said. All 3. All 3, he said. Agreed. She picked up her bag from the floor beside the chair. She straightened her blazer. She looked at the 2 pieces of her resignation letter on the table, and thought about leaving them there as a statement of some kind, but the practical part of her brain noted that those pieces had her signature and personal information on them, and she should not leave them in a room that other people used. She picked them up and put them in her bag. Let's go, she said. Now here is something I need to say to everyone watching right now. You found this channel. You clicked on this story. And you have been here, with Emily and Hyunwoo, from the beginning. If you close this video right now without subscribing, this story continues without you. The next chapter. The mountain. The room with the photographs. What Hyunwoo says to Emily in the dark when he thinks she is asleep. You will miss all of it. And you will not find it easily. But if you subscribe, turn on that notification bell, and share this video with one person who needs a good story tonight, we will always bring you back home. Don't leave Emily now. She needs witnesses. Hit that subscribe button. The car that took them out of Seoul was not a company car. It was blacked out, heavier than it looked, and there was a man in the front passenger seat who Emily had never seen before despite 2 years of knowing every face in Hyunwoo's professional orbit. He was Korean mid-30s with the kind of stillness that matched Hyunwoo's and a scar that ran from below his left ear to his jaw. Kong, Hyunwoo said as they got in. The man turned and looked at Emily with a very direct, assessing look. Then he nodded once. Miss Adeyemi. His voice was low and careful. We have been expecting this conversation for some time. Have you? Emily said flatly. Kong. Hyunwoo said, and the name was a full sentence. Kong faced forward. They drove. The city unwound around them and then thinned. And then the buildings gave way to roads that gave way to mountains that rose up on either side of them like the landscape was closing. Emily watched it all through the window and processed. She was good at processing. Her mother always said that about her. Emily processes like a computer. She goes quiet, and when she comes back she has already made a decision. The decision she was currently working toward was complicated by the fact that all the variables were things she had not known about until 45 minutes ago. She thought about Amara. Amara, who had called her this morning to ask if she had already quit that man's job, and had told her to live your life, with the enthusiasm of someone who had been saying this same thing for 2 years. Amara, whose uncle apparently worked for the man who was using Emily as a pressure point against the criminal syndicate run by Amara's best friend's boss. The universe, Emily thought, had a deeply uncomfortable sense of irony. She thought about David Kim and his 3 thoughtful messages and his good restaurant choice, and she felt a particular kind of disgust that had nothing to do with him personally, and everything to do with the realization that someone had calculated exactly the kind of man she would say yes to and then sent him in. She thought about 2 years of Wednesday mornings at her coffee shop and Friday lunches in the park, and the shadow of people she had never seen moving at the edge of her life, keeping her safe without her knowledge or consent. And then she thought about Hyunwoo saying her name in that boardroom. the way it had cracked. Just slightly. Like something under enormous pressure finding the one small fissure it could breathe through. She turned and looked at him. He was on his phone, reading something, his face back to its usual controlled expression. But she had seen the other one now. She could not unsee it. How long? She asked. He looked up. How long what? How long have you? How long has it been like this? For you. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked back at his phone. Since the 3rd week, he said. The 3rd week of what? Of you working for me. She did the math. 2 years and 4 months. Minus 3 weeks. That's a long time, he said. Yes, I am aware. Hyunwoo. That is, why didn't you? What would I have said? He asked. He did not say it sharply. He said it with a genuine, quiet bewilderment, like the question had been living in him for a long time, and he still did not have a satisfactory answer. What do you say to someone like you? How do you begin that conversation when you are what I am? The car moved through the mountains. You could have started with hello, Emily said. Something happened at the corner of his mouth. It was not quite a smile. It was the distant cousin of one. You already said hello to me, he said. On your first day. You walked into my office with the briefing documents and you said, Good morning, Mr. Shin. I have read everything and I have 3 questions, and also your 11 o'clock has a conflict with your 2 o'clock. But I have already moved the 2 o'clock so you do not need to worry about it. And then you stood there waiting. Emily blinked. You remember that? Word for word, he said simply. She looked out the window again. The mountains were very close now. 3 questions, she said. Yes. Do you remember what they were? You wanted to know the protocol for calls from Chairman O. You wanted to know if my schedule preferences were fixed or flexible. And you wanted to know, he paused. You wanted to know if there was a good jollof rice place near the office that was not too expensive. Emily pressed her lips together to keep from smiling. I was new to Seoul. I know. I found 3 options by the end of the week. She remembered that. An email from Hyunwoo's address. No greeting, no explanation, just 3 restaurant names and addresses, with a note that read, The 3rd one is best on Fridays. She had thought it was the most efficient piece of personal information she had ever received from anyone. She had not understood, at the time, that it was as close to warmth as this man knew how to get. She understood now. You are going to tell me everything when we get there, she said. You promised. I promised. Everything, Hyunwoo. The whole of it. The whole of it, he agreed. Kong in the front seat said nothing, but Emily noticed that his shoulders had done the same small drop that Hyunwoo's had done in the boardroom. Like both of them had been holding something for a very long time, and were only now, cautiously, beginning to set it down. The fortress was not what Emily had expected. She had imagined, given everything she now knew about Hyunwoo Shin, something cold and impersonal. Steel and glass and armed guards at every corner. Instead it was a house. A large one, built into the mountain like it had grown there, dark wood and stone and windows that looked out over ridges that dissolved into clouds. There were guards, yes. She counted 4 on the approach, 2 at the gate, more shadows at the perimeter that she was probably not meant to notice. But the building itself had a quality that she could only describe, strangely, as careful. Like someone had built it with the specific intention of making it feel like somewhere a person could breathe. She mentioned this to Kong as he walked her to the entrance, and he gave her a look that she could not fully interpret. He designed it himself, Kong said. Spent 4 months on the plans. The architect kept asking him what it was for and he kept saying. Kong stopped himself. If you're still here watching, it means you're already part of Emily and Hyunwoo's journey. So take a second and subscribe to the channel. I'm putting a lot of heart into bringing this story to life, and your support truly helps. Drop a comment telling me what you think will happen next, and also let me know where you're watching from, and what time it is for you. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss the next part. Because trust me, the next part of this story is something you won't want to miss.